I am Kim Friedel. I'm the director of the Office of Preschool Education. I would like to first ask everybody to keep their devices on mute. And I would like to introduce Mr. Corey Booker, our Assistant Commissioner.
Good morning. I am Carrie Booker, and it is my pleasure to welcome you here today. We definitely want people to be successful in going for preschool, and we have the pleasure of welcoming our partner, West Orange School District, to help you in this task. And with that, I will turn things back to Kim.
Great, thank you. So before I introduce Ebony Mendez from West Orange, I do want to just say a couple of quick things. So number one, just as you are listening to their presentation, if you are looking to pursue preschool in the future, just be aware you must be offering full day kindergarten, and you must be able to provide full day to any preschool disabled classrooms that you have. So I just want you to keep that in the forefront of your planning.
Right.
Okay, again, please, if everyone could keep themselves muted, we would appreciate your cooperation. I'd like to introduce Ebony Mendez, Assistant Superintendent from West Orange, and we are going to thank them for sharing their process. We think this will be very informational for all of you. Good morning, Ebony.
Good morning, Kim. Thank you. Thank you to Assistant Commissioner Booker and to the New Jersey Department of Early Education and yourself for just inviting us to share our experiences on behalf of our district, West Orange, and our preschool committee. We are very grateful to be a part of this preschool conversation, to share our preschool expansion planning experiences. And we're excited for everyone who's here considering applying for the preschool expansion aid. For each district that applies and gets awarded, I think we're moving collectively toward our goal for universal preschool in the state of New Jersey. For some, it may only be 200 students, right? For us, it's closer to 900, and for the larger districts, it may be 2,000, but together, I think we're meeting that goal. And in West Orange, when we consider the impact that 2 additional years of early childhood will have on a child's academic success, that commitment and the planning process was worth it, right? So our hashtag or our motto in West Orange quickly became pending award notification. Everything that became our language. We prepared as if. We prepared and moved forward as if we would receive that aid. And we encourage you to do the same. We know that it's a big investment on the forefront, but once you receive it, it's worth it. And the timeline that is currently set up of just those 3 weeks to open once you get notified is just not enough. All right. And so then before we get started, I would like to publicly thank our interim superintendent and present her. She was uncompromisingly instrumental in aiding our district to realize its preschool goals. Critical to the planning process, making sure that every district department was really just available and going to be on the same page with us, as will your superintendent need to be, right? And for the communication to the board. So we just want to thank her in advance. Okay.
They don't need to see me. Keep going.
Okay.
I don't need to do this.
All right. So then that was her. She was in my office. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share our screen and we're going to start. Please bear with me on this. Is everybody able to see my screen? Yes. All right. Excellent.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to get started. Our preschool committee, these are the members of our preschool committee. It's not all of them, but the ones who are present today will be speaking and representing the work of the whole. It's very important when choosing your committee that you have the right people at the table. The members of this committee were the ones who we would say the boots on the ground, who were going to get it done. people who are extremely organized, who are able to follow through on those tasks that are required. It's a very detailed process. And critical, I think, to the process is making sure that your communication is tight across all of the departments. So we have with us Beatrice Hanratty, who is our K-5 Supervisor of English Language Arts. She was also the co-chair for the preschool committee, extremely instrumental for that transition to kindergarten piece, all things curriculum, professional development, instructional materials. This was a huge part of the application. Felix Plata is our K-12 supervisor of ESL and world languages. When we're thinking about our specialized populations, who's representing that group? How are you communicating in multiple languages if that applies to you? Very important. Michael Semino is our director of buildings and grounds. The facilities person will be walk hand in hand with you through the process as you're visiting sites, as you're making sure that the facilities are in compliance to all of the regulations. We have with us Dr. Joseph Vespignani. He's our executive director of personnel. Again, critical member of the team and the process for staffing, the job descriptions, the appointments, pending board certification, pending award notification. So these were huge parts of this process. Susan Dannemiller, she is our parent and a private provider, critical member to the team, understanding one as a parent, giving us input, two as a private provider, being able to offer that preschool lens because we're a K-12 district, so we didn't have the preschool experience that we needed. And then we have our teachers, Jennifer Catalano, our kindergarten teacher, Miriam Cargo Jackson, a kindergarten teacher, and Jennifer Sisman, who's a reading specialist in our district. And again, when you're answering questions in the application for those pieces, that's critically important. When we are presenting, you're going to hear us say our name each time. That's for closed captioning. So that's the reason why we're doing so. And as we begin to present, we've grouped all of our work in categories. We've chunked it so that we can really just share what our planning experiences were, give you an opportunity to ask questions, and then move on to the next group of categories. So because it's a lot of information. So as we're going through a section, please in the chat, type in any questions that you have as it relates to that section. We will present for a few minutes on those categories, answer the questions that are in the chat, move on to the next section, and at the end, we'll open it up for any additional questions, and you will be, able to unmute yourself or raise your digital hand, and then we'll answer questions that way. When we're thinking about the timeline, this was the timeline for 2022 for submission, for actually submitting your application. Your timeline may vary. We're beginning here just to give you an idea that the application was released in July of 2022 because it's dependent on the governor's budget. And then we submit in 1 month by August 22, and then we're awarded in September 22. So we found that that would have been impossible for us to really open preschools and plan in that short amount of time. So really, the planning for us started a year ahead of time. We were definitely thinking about planning and acting again as if we were going to receive the award. We're going to begin with these three major areas: determining need, our year one parameters, our private providers, and our facilities. We'll spend about 3 minutes on each, and then we'll take about 5 minutes to answer questions. So a huge part of the beginning of your application is going to ask you to determine need. What's your pulse on your community? How do you know that the community wants preschool? For us, our Council of PTAs really began the work. They assembled a committee in the community, and that committee really went out and started to survey providers and start to get an idea before they even brought it to the superintendent. And they did that because they wanted to hold us accountable. We didn't feel that we had space in our district. We had no space in our district schools. So they went out and did a lot of the legwork. They brought it to our superintendent. We received petitions from the community when it was released what the district was eligible for in aid. At our district level, students were entering kindergarten with uneven preschool experiences. There were students who had 2 years of preschool. There were students who were entering into a classroom for the first time. And the idea of kindergarten retention was really starting to surface. Also, we saw that a lot of our students who were in kindergarten who had not attended preschool were now in our basic skills programs. Our special education referrals started to tick up. And so then we put out a community survey. We have a universe of approximately 962 students, and we wanted to know where they were. We surveyed both our parents and our providers. We asked our parents, what are the ages of your children at home? Between 0 to 4. We wanted to know for the next 4 years who might be entering our preschools. We asked our parents if they sent their children to preschool. If so, where? That way we had an idea of where our outreach was going to be. Some of those preschools were within our communities. Some of them were outside and closer to our parents' place of employment. If we asked our parents what their primary reason was for not sending their children to preschool. Number 1 was cost. Number 2 was transportation. And number 3 was they just wanted more time at home. The cost in West Orange for preschool is between $1,200 and $2,200 a month per child. So it was very cost prohibitive. And in our district, our economically disadvantaged rate is 47%, and in specific schools up to 80%. So there was a great need. These are the things that we included in our application. We also asked them if we had preschool, would they send them? And the answer was yes. We also asked our providers how many West Orange students are sitting in your schools so that we had an idea of how many would automatically translate into a per pupil expenditure that they would be eligible for. We didn't have an issue with recruitment and trying to get our parents on board. Everybody wanted in, so we had to set parameters for year 1. We decided that we would go with our Title I schools first, and we would focus on our economically disadvantaged students, mixed age, both 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds. However, one of the prerequisites for the application is that all of your half-day sections have to be full day. So we have a preschool disabilities program where we had half days of preschool. We had to make sure that our budget could sustain full day sections. So that's just a consideration that you may want to think about. If you have any half day sections, how will you make them whole? Because you can't apply for the preschool expansion aid unless all of your classes are full time. The second consideration here with our year 1 was our special education and inclusion. It is a requirement of the preschool aid application. And so then you want to think about how you're going to integrate your inclusion students into your preschool planning. We will talk about special education separately. Our universe was 962. The application is going to ask you to multiply your first grade enrollment by 2. So that's how we come up with the 962. The goal is that you serve 90% of your preschool universe within 5 years. So 90% of our 962 for us was the 866. And then you have to write out each year how many students you think you're going to bring on board. In year 1, we brought in 144. And in year 2, we're planning 150. And in year 3, 525. Wow, 525 in year 3. Yes, year 3. We started thinking that would be our 1-year goal, and everybody said to us, start small, West Orange, start small, and they were right. There is no way we would have been able to lift that off of the ground if we would have went so aggressively. So that would be just our feedback to you, start small, because just hiring your staffing, understanding how you have to move from building to building to have oversight, the professional development. It really is challenging. Another consideration for our year 1 was that we had to lease. We didn't have any space in our building, so we had to lease and partner with all of our providers. And then that brought us to our providers. We had to identify who they were. We went to our township website to see all of the providers in West Orange. Our parent surveys, we were able to see where they were sending their students. Our non-pubs from our Title I, we were able to see how many of our students were in their locations. We started to hold monthly meetings with our providers just to gauge interest, not just for year one. We gave them surveys and we said, who's interested in year one? Who's interested for year two? Who's interested for year three? This can change. We gave them the out. You can say yes now, and if you need to exit later, we understand. We found out who was sitting in their seats, specifically their 3-year-olds, because those would be moving up into those 4-year-old spots in year one. And then we went and we visited their sites to make sure that they were really up to the facility specifications. I think our biggest challenge was building trust. Why? Our providers thought we were going to put them out of business. That was the biggest concern, and I think that's what prohibited West Orange from really taking advantage of the aid earlier. And so then we really just began to meet with them monthly, assure them that our interest was not to bring all of preschool into our schools. We didn't have space, right? But that we would be partnering with them in this mixed delivery model. So, just to point to that, those are more points on the application, the mixed delivery model, right? The ability to have your students mixed ages 3 and 4, and then when you're able to open. So that's really important. We help them understand the requirements, the timelines, the expectations, and just assure them that we would do that together. Another consideration here, wherever you see this blue little star on the side, it's an interdepartmental communication or a critical member of your committee, and that was that facilities director. And so ours came with us every time we went to visit the sites. He was able to not only look at the preschool expansion requirements, but our district requirements, which were additional. The code compliancy, the fact that each space had to be 950 square feet with 750 square feet of instructional space. The bathroom has to be in the classroom or in line of sight. The bathroom facilities have to be appropriate sizing for the age of the students. We cannot have preschool in a basement, on a 3rd floor, or in a trailer. So we had to do some moving around in our district just to make sure that we were compliant for the preschool requirements. We had to think about the fact that some of our providers were outside of West Orange, and what would that mean for transportation. Some of our providers didn't have bathrooms in the classroom, but they were line of sight. So we did apply for waivers and those were accepted. Some of our providers didn't have 950 square feet, but they had the minimum requirement, which was 700 of uninterrupted instructional space. So we were able to apply for waivers there. Some additional things that we didn't think about originally was the technology and the wiring. Is there internet capability in this facility? Because we will use that in our instruction. Our faculty lounge space, staff parking was huge. One of our providers is on a very busy road. So we had to reach out to our township to remove the sign that said no standing, no parking, no anything, so that our bus could drop off our students. So just these are things that are maybe small, but they become really big as you're moving forward in the process. That drop off and pickup location, one of our providers, again, that main street, there was a CVS parking lot across the street. So we had to just speak with the owners there and get them to agree to allow us to have our parents park there for the drop off. And then we have a crossing guard that facilitated that for us. And then your meals, is there a kitchen or are you going to have your meals dropped off? All right, we're going to pause here and see if there are any questions as it relates to these areas. If so, you could place them into the chat. For Jennifer, we didn't have a preschool teacher because we don't have preschool. That's why we had our kindergarten teachers for kindergarten, and we had Susan Dana Miller, who is a preschool provider, on the committee. And as we moved forward, we were able to integrate preschool. We also included on our larger committee our principal for our preschool disabilities program, and she definitely informed our process in that way. There's a question there for why no 3rd floor. Kim, I don't know the response to that.
Sure. So, third floor for preschool is prohibited in the New Jersey Facilities Code. It is a safety issue to have 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds having to go down 3 flights of stairs in an emergency. So, it is actually, you would find it in the Facilities Code that it is not allowable.
Okay. So I'm going to keep going since I don't see any other questions in the chat, but just a reminder, this is sectioned, so you'll have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of every section and at the end as well. Let's see. So we're going to move over into the next section, which is recruitment, registration, transportation, and wraparound programs. Felix Plata is going to begin with recruitment.
Yes, Felix Plata. I'm the ESL and World Languages Supervisor for K-12. So as you can imagine, recruitment is important. As was presented, our district utilized data to identify our district priorities. And in our year one, as was mentioned, our Title I communities was identified as the priority. Our district classes, we had to make intentional outreach efforts to target those communities, especially realizing that many of those families or community members may not be in our K-12 program yet. So that was intentional and focused. Our district classrooms, we focused on our 4-year-olds first, and then 3-year-old siblings who were siblings to the 4-year-olds, as well as if we had additional space, additional 3-year-olds would be accepted to the program. Another important recruitment opportunity that we had to focus on was leveraging our community partnerships. So that meant reaching out with our ESL community, our teachers, our RTI specialists who had relationships with our parents, special relationships with our parents, to make sure we were communicating with them so that they're aware of the opportunity that was potentially going to be coming to the district pending approval. We also partnered with town cultural organizations to communicate every aspect of the process, food banks, religious institutions, and of course our PTA network. Other communication efforts included phone calls, social media, communicating through the newspaper, and ensuring that multilingual communications were utilized, so that we ensured that we did to the best of our ability communicating with every community member regarding this opportunity. We also created a preschool expansion website that we monitored, maintained, and updated frequently as things evolved in the process. And we made sure that there was a key point of contact in the district where if community members needed to reach out or had questions, they had a specific office or person within that office to reach out to. The ESL department and our family liaison, which our district did have a family liaison or family resource coordinator. Those were critical departments for this outreach effort, since again, our Title I communities were our focus communities for our year one in our plan. Other considerations was consistently thinking about how can we update and communicate as things evolved with our community, and as well as something that we're considering for the following year is establishing certain parameters for the providers, such as a provider can be responsible for 80% of the seats in their location, and then the district fill 20%. And at that time, we can set certain dates. If the private provider wasn't able to complete or fill 80% of the seats, then the district could potentially take over and say, all right, we will fill the rest of those seats. reviewing our registration process was especially important. As was shared, our district is a kindergarten through 12 district, or was prior to this opportunity. So we had to meet with our registration staff, review the process, review the application, and make sure that through those discussions, any modifications that needed to be made to that pre-registration application, that they were made, revisited, and adapted. We also had to plan for pre-registration nights. That was a critical piece of the process, developing a plan of how we would offer those pre-registration nights to our community, so that one, they could apply and register directly online, which is how our registration process works, as well as having support from staff, multilingual staff, to support families in completing that application process and answering any questions that they may have had.
Yeah, and when we think about registration, our lessons learned, if we look back, this was probably one of the most complex areas that I think we needed to reconsider and reconsider. We didn't do as well in this area as we would have liked. So one of our challenges was that we did not realize we didn't have a process for verifying residency across the providers. We have our process in our district, but they were registering their own students into our site, and their verification process was very different. So hindsight, looking back, we would have really set up a process and trained the providers as they were registering their students to say, you must have these documents, they must be uploaded into the site, or else, you know, what we had to do, we were rushing those 3 weeks to get all of the students in, to get all of them accounted for, especially since the CDS codes are not assigned by the state until after you get approved, right? So the CDS code is the code that each school has unique to the address. In order for you to register them into your SIS, your student information system, you have to have that code. So what we did was we put them into a temporary place in our system, and we waited for those codes to come in. But again, this was a very big area for us as a reflective place. Moving forward, we have our processes in place. We're going to train our providers. We're going to be much more clear about the timeline for getting all of the students into our system so that we could move forward. And then a consideration is when you have that registration opportunity, if that's what you decide to do, especially for parents who may need assistance filling out or entering into the information into the computer. We had our ESL teachers come. We had one-stop shopping, right? They came to the evening, they had the laptops, they registered, we verified residency, and they signed up for their appointments at the same time to meet with the registration department. If not, I don't know that we would have gotten them to come back multiple times, right? It was a challenge, but this was us looking back for some lessons learned. Next, transportation. So number one for us was registration. Number two for us was transportation. We were bringing preschool on during the bus driver shortage, right? And we thought that this was going to be the thing that stopped us. It did not, but transportation is not included in the preschool expansion aid. It has to be budgeted for in the local budget. Transportation is not included in the aid. It has to be budgeted in the local budget. There is the report that the transportation department will do every, I think, October or November, I can't remember the date, where they now add the enrollment. And theoretically, you should see an increase in your transportation aid. But because it's a formula, unless you have a huge number of students entering at once, you're not really going to see that increase in aid in that first year. So this is a consideration. Do you have budget for the transportation? If you have your own buses, great. For us, we had to outsource, and our outsourcing was at the tune of $74,000 per route. So that was huge. So we had to think about alternatives. So for us, we saw that many preschool parents opted out of transportation. We found that out because we called all of our providers and asked them, how many of your students actually take the bus? The reason we have to offer transportation is because we offer transportation to our general education students. If you don't offer transportation to your students, then you don't have to offer it to preschool, but we do. So once we found out that not too many parents were opting for transportation anyway, we invested our dollars into wraparound programming, right? So we put that on that initial questionnaire that went out in that pre-registration packet because that was going to be critical. If parents were bringing their students to before school or after school, then we didn't have to provide the transportation, and it brought our numbers down from 144 to 17, right? And so then that was one bus, and then we could afford that. We did reach out to the transportation department at the state various times to really understand if we don't have drivers, if we can't get these routes, are we allowed to potentially consider a parent contract? Not aid in lieu, that's different, that's for special education and out of district, but a parent contract to say, mom, dad, we don't have a bus for you. Can we pay you this amount of money for your mileage instead of, right? And they did say that if at the end of the day, that's what it came to, that we would be able to do that. We did not have to. We were able to leverage our wraparound programming. And again, understanding those zoning regulations and those street restrictions are really important. And so I've talked about the wraparound programs a bit. These were not supplied by the district. These were supplied by our private providers. The challenge for them was staffing because we were adding so many students. So what we did do was we sent out an email to our staff and to let them know there are opportunities at the private providers if you'd like to take advantage of that. And then our staff was able to fill those slots. Something to consider about that is the timing. What time does your preschool start? What time does your regular day start? What time does the wraparound program start? And does it jive with the teacher contract, right? So that was a huge consideration. Questions and answers for this section here.
Ebony, there were a couple of questions that came in about the first section as well. Do we want to touch on those as well as the new ones?
Sure. I can't see my chat. If you want to read them out, that would be great.
Okay. Beatrice, do you have them up?
I can see it now. I can see it now.
I have some questions. Let me just pull it. I have them up. Let me just see. So we spoke to the third floor, the security one. What security requirements must be in place, cameras, doors, etc. Will providers be required to complete the same monthly drills as CHPS, and what that would look like? Are classes required to have windows, specifically a classroom not in the basement? Is it required to have windows? So that's all from one person.
Yeah, so
Okay.
Go ahead, Kim.
Do you want me to take it or do you want to answer it? Okay. So there are not specific requirements for your providers about security. When you are entering into agreements, you can have these conversations and come to agreements as to what they have. Now, most providers have some type of a security to their doors because they don't want people walking in to their center, but it may not look exactly like what a school building has. So those are conversations to have. And if you want to touch on that, you can, Ebony. Yes, the providers are required to complete the drills because their children are registered to your district. So look at them like a school. So if you have school 1, school 2, school 3, and you have ABC childcare and Head Start, they're locations that your children are being served in. So they would need to submit to whomever you designate the monthly reports. They also do them for their license. So it's not really much different. Classes to have windows. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to get back to you with that answer. I believe they do, but I want to check with our facilities folk to ensure that I give you proper information. It would be best practice to have windows in the classroom, but I don't want to say that it is required if it is not, in fact.
Right. For us, we did apply all of our district requirements to our preschools. So fresh air intake, the HVAC, the ability to open windows. So that's what we did on the facility slide. We mentioned one of the considerations should be the preschool expansion aid requirements in consideration with your district requirements, because our district did require that. We do have cameras and security features, you know, the hand bars that lock and all of those things in our preschool provider locations. With regard to the trailers, I'm hearing an echo. Yeah, I'm not sure. If everyone could just mute themselves, thank you. Regarding the trailers, someone wrote that your preschool is currently in trailers, and are you allowed to use those? We understood that answer to be no, so we had to move preschool out of our trailers for general education. Again, our preschool disabilities program is different. That comes up under different guidelines, but for our preschool expansion, we were not permitted to put the students into the trailers. For our first year, we did not allow our parents to self-select. We thought that that would have been, well, for our first year, we were looking at our Title I schools, so there were only 3 locations, and all of our students who were in the Title I schools who registered, we were able to accommodate in year 1. So in year 2, we're going to consider that, but we're going to put a formula in place. What we don't want to happen in our district is that all of the economically disadvantaged students are all in one school and all of the affluent students are in another school, right? We want to make sure that we are not segregating our kids by default with parent choice. So we are considering that now. We're considering how we're going to do that. We're looking at our locations. We may reserve certain spots for certain schools or for certain demographic, but we want to ensure that we don't see that some of our preschools become small microcosms of students, right? And that they're not homogeneously grouped. The providers follow the district schedule. So when we get to that section, you'll see that calendar. We shared our district school calendar with the providers, and they share our schedule. That's critical for professional development. That's critical for transportation and the days that you're open or closed. So you'll want to share that out with them in your process.
Would you like me to continue where we're leaving off with the questions?
I'm able to see them now.
Okay, because there's one above those.
Okay, go ahead. What is it?
Could a school district that has a waiting list partner or send its students to neighboring school districts that happens to have open seats due to low resident enrollment? And if so, can they get the state aid to pay their neighboring district for taking their students?
I don't know the answer to that, Kim.
So it is a complicated, the answer is in some situations, yes. So what I'm going to say is at the end, Mr. Corso, you'll get email addresses for us here at the DOE. We will go into detail with you. And if you become eligible, there will be a technical assistance session before when the application is released, and we will share in detail then more information about that. But the answer is that yes, it is possible to partner with a neighboring district. You would get the state aid for your students and you would send them the funding. So that's the short answer.
Okay. Did we have students register prior to receiving the aid in September? Yes, absolutely. We pre-registered them. Our registration office was able to create just a kind of like a dummy placeholder in our student information system, as you would with a charter school, for example, as you're thinking about pre-registering. And we held those students in that pre-registration queue. But we collected all the paperwork. We were able to verify residency. We were able to start to get counts of how many students we had that were 4 years old, if they had siblings, how many were 3-year-old. We were able to see where they lived in order to start to think about our transportation routes. So that was, again, critically important to the process. Regarding meals, is there assistance to help us if students qualify for free and reduced lunch? So in our district, if a student qualified for free and reduced lunch, then they received free and reduced lunch in preschool as well. That went through our food services department, and we had all of our meals delivered to our schools. And so then the answer to that for our district was yes. Hazlitt is asking if transportation is included in the first year. No. It's
No,
not.
actually,
Oh,
yes, it is. The first year of funding, you can use PEA towards transportation, but you must make sure that all of the required components are in place. Your staffing, the instructional coaches, and so forth. And I will tell you why it's allowed in the first year that you can contribute to it is because you basically missed the deadline for the transportation aid. So your first year, we allow funding to be used for transportation, but again, it cannot be your primary focus of the PEA. You have to have the teachers, the assistants, the curriculum, the PD, and then you can apply funding.
wow. Okay. So
You're gonna go. You're gonna go out now. Go revise your budget.
I'm gonna go revise it. We will be talking about the space we leased in a future slide. Yes. Must the salaries of the teachers employed by the provider align somewhat with the district's pay guides? All salaries for the teachers that we hired for our district classrooms were on our pay guides. We did share our guides with our preschools for alignment. We did. And that's what they included in their budgets, which they do submit to you. And yes, all of the students are considered district students, so they are accounted for in your ASSA report and in your reporting. All right. I'm going to move on to the next section, and then we'll take the next group of questions as we move forward. We're now going to talk about curriculum, instructional materials, professional development, and transitions to kindergarten. Beatrice?
Hi. So I'm taking this one.
Oh,
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Sisman. I am the reading specialist at Hazel Avenue School. So for curriculum, we had to start by understanding the state standards for preschool to ensure whichever program we chose aligned with what the standards for the state are. Then we were able to further narrow it down by examining the state suggested curricula on the application. So if you've looked through the application, you'll notice that they listed 4 different curricula that they have approved of: creative curriculum, Connect for Learning, High Scope, and Tools of the Mind. We were looking for the one that most closely aligned with our current kindergarten curriculum. We thought this would be essential when transitioning to preschool students to kindergarten, and it will help ensure that the students would have a solid foundation for the prerequisite skills for the incoming kindergarten students. We also considered the curriculum that the providers were already using in their preschool classrooms, but since we didn't have any current preschool teachers on our committee, we had to rely on borrowing materials from other preschools to review the potential curriculum. Additionally, several members of the committee went on site visits to observe the curriculum in actual preschool classrooms, and this gave us a better idea as to what would be most closely aligned with our current kindergarten program. After all this analysis, we as a committee felt that the high scope curriculum with the core advantage assessment would be the best choice for our preschool program because they both aligned well with what we currently use in our elementary schools and and we're moving into the challenges that we may have faced. Providers who weren't using high scope and core advantage were hesitant to change their curriculum. So we had to get everybody on board with, moving into high scope and core advantage. We also had to ensure that all populations of students would be best served by using this curriculum that we chose. So that included our special education students, ESL, students who are economically disadvantaged. Some things to consider while you are going through this process of choosing a curriculum. All preschool classrooms must use the same curriculum. And when you're thinking about the level of teacher experience with the curriculum, you want to select something, you want to take that into consideration. As someone who also served on the interview committee for the preschool teachers, we never eliminated a candidate for not having experience, but we wanted to try to have some experienced teachers, especially because we had such a quick turnaround between receiving the aid and the opening of the schools. Finally, you're going to want to provide PD for all staff prior to opening. Even if a provider already used the same curriculum that you chose, you'll want everyone to have the most updated training. And just as a special note on this slide, we see that there's critical members of the committee, the ELA department, intervention teachers, kindergarten teachers, ESL teachers, were all involved in helping to choose the curriculum.
Beatrice Hanratty, K-5 English Language Arts Supervisor, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about instructional materials and professional development. So when we look at the instructional materials, there are really four main areas that you're going to need to consider purchasing, such as your actual curriculum, your assessments, classroom furniture, and the instructional materials that are going to support the physical curriculum. So as we talked about, that we selected our curriculum, and for that particular one, the cost was about $1,400 per classroom or per teacher. In the assessments, we needed to use the Eckers Environmental Rating Scale, right, which evaluates the program, and we all need to use that. Then you had to choose a screener. We choose the early screening inventory and the core advantage as the main assessment to assess the skills and the key indicators that align to the curriculum of the content that was being taught. For all of those assessments, it was approximately $600 per teacher. And I say per teacher, you can get away with it for each classroom, but something to consider later on is you might want to think of a set for your teacher coach or your teacher assistants. You might want them to have some pieces. For example, they may assist with the early screening inventory or with the core advantage assessments. So you may want to have those pieces for them as well. And of course, for your administration, whoever's rolling out and supporting should have a set of materials on hand. With this, we negotiated with our vendors to order these materials and furnitures pending the award notification. And our vendors, they came to our location site to really measure our classrooms, to help with design the layout, to see what they could recommend based on that space, and they created the quotes. And we needed to also make sure the materials that we were ordering, the instructional materials, were aligned with Eckers, right? So they were able to provide those quotes, and then we were able to create the POs. However, with that, we did have in writing that those POs would be voided if the application was denied. So as Mr. Mendez explained earlier, everything we did as we moved forward was as if we were receiving it, but the message was clear in any written document pending approval, right? So we were very cautious to make sure we followed that. Some of the big challenges for that, I'm sorry, also I want to just go back to the furniture. The furniture for the classrooms, right? You want to consider in all the instructional materials to support the curriculum, to support the assessment, down to the Play-Doh, the sand, right? That cost us approximately $18,000 to $23,000 per classroom, depending on what it is, you wanted to select, right? You can go from the must-need to, right, the grand selection, but that's the range for that. Some of the challenges were the quick turnaround between the award notification and opening of school. For example, right, receiving furniture materials and to those multiple locations. So what we did was we set up with our vendors to have everything on a 3-day turnaround. Because we had those POs created early on, they were able to already have those materials in the warehouse. Again, with the exception, it was voided if we didn't move forward. And then they can just get them on a 3-day turnaround, just setting up a delivery to our location. So once we got the award from the state, one of the top 4 phone calls, right, was over to our vendor to get those trucks moving, to get those classrooms and those materials there. They also, it also helped ensure that we would have less back-ordered materials, and which we still faced it because, right, with shortages of materials and shipments in general, but for the most part, we had a good portion of the materials on hand. And the vendor had set up, so you can negotiate that with your vendor, to have a team come in. They unpacked all the materials and furniture. They assembled all their furniture right in the classrooms, right, as we were simultaneously PDing with the teachers. And they came and removed all the garbaging and all the packaging off the site premises, so we didn't have to worry about provider dumpsters, that custodial, so that was all just removed out with it. Another consideration is when you're purchasing your curriculum and your screening tools, you want to really ensure that your district, your private, your Head Start, everybody has all of the materials and the updated editions. Please do not just take their word, physically check it, especially the editions, because then this will cause an issue after when you're starting to train and materials are not aligned or somebody physically does not have them. Ecker's alignment was also a consideration. You want to deepen your understanding of the expectations. Personally, the Ecker's books are not expensive. They're about $20. So you might want to just, get that on hand for yourself, because believe it or not, it does help a lot with the planning, because as I was living in the moment, I wish I would have had that book ahead of time. I was learning that there's a lot of support to the decision making when you're purchasing your materials and classroom setup. So something just for a quick little example is to be Ecker's compliant, right? You need to have a sand water table. So we had a sand water table. What we didn't know was sand and water had to be separate. So that table either have 2 compartments or 1 table for sand, 1 table for water. So things of that nature. Setting up your classroom, with Ecker's, you'll see that you don't want to set up a very noisy center like building blocks or playing house next to a library or a quiet reading center. So those are the things that getting connected with Ecker's ahead of time will help with that process. You also want to make some use of your alternative funding, right? So when possible, we purchased some of our curriculum and materials under the ESSA 3 because it was allowable expense. But again, the agreed, because we didn't know if we were going to be awarded the aid, so we were not able to unopen those materials. They had to stay closed, right? So they would take everything back, but we had it here in the location, so we were ready to go for those training purposes. And you want to make sure you're ordering other materials as well for staff, for offices, not just your teachers and classrooms, right? This was something we realized a little after on. Oh boy, we need nurses supplies, administrative assistant supplies, right? Custodial supplies, etc. So you really want to make sure you think of all the buckets within the operations and what supplies you need to get started with that. I'm going to shift to our professional development slide. This lends right into it. And what we did is, so for our professional development, again, we use the high scope curriculum. We use the early screening inventory. We use Core Advantage. Danielson was our district evaluation observation tool, and then we had Ecker's. So for that PD, the curriculum itself for high scope was about 750 participants, but there's also, if you want to have them in person, other travel expenses. So for about 13 participants, the cost was around $9,000 for in-person training. As far as the assessments of Ecker's, the early screening inventory, Core Advantage, and CamView, which we selected, it was a parent piece that aligned to Core Advantage. That was approximately $11,000, excuse me, but that training was up to 25 to 30 participants, depending on the company. So you want to really consider, right, that high intense professional development for 2 weeks, right? We recommend those 10 days of PD, but you want to schedule those tentative dates with companies because they book up, especially once those award letters come in, right? You're not going to get those dates. So we booked up, we penciled in those dates, again, build those relationships. Everything was pending approval, but we had those dates penciled in, so we were ready to go. We gave a little cushion, for where the application was due, but then, you had to get those dates going. Sorry. You also want to schedule your professional development as far as having your materials. Excuse me 1 second. My apologies.
You okay there?
Can you take it a minute, Ebony?
Sure, yeah. So while she's hydrating there, yeah, I think the professional development was such a huge piece. We're giving you numbers, not because your numbers may be the same in terms of dollar amounts, but just to give you an idea of what these costs are as you build out your budget. All of this is included and allowable in the preschool expansion aid, but when you build out your budget, you're going to have to estimate what your costs are for your curriculum, for your assessments, for your professional development, all of these things. And salaries will take a lot of your budget. So we're just kind of giving you some ideas of costs so that as you're planning out your budget, you can estimate, and as you get your POs, then you can refine. But this gives you an idea of what you will potentially spend for items, instructional materials.
Thank you, Ebony. I'm back. I
Yeah.
think I'm okay. Coming
Good.
up with that little cold.
Good.
So some of the challenges, right, that we had faced, again, was making sure we had these materials for those authentic training experiences. So again, tapping into those ESSA3 funds that have that allowable, but not opening them, right? Keeping them closed to that award comes in, and then you can explore those materials, which is why we also borrowed some materials so we can dive into those books. And you really want to get the commitment from your providers to attend the PD. This did pose a big challenge because, sometimes the providers or Head Starts will convey that they already were trained and they don't want to double train. And I do have a level of respect for that. I do understand overtraining. So we want it to be sensitive, but you need to think of some considerations when you're thinking about that. What was the level of training? Was it from a vendor? Or think about, was it turnkey, right? Because you want to think about that level of training that was received and how long ago maybe they were trained and the additions to what they were trained in. Because what you want to know is it's critical to ensure, as you want to respect everybody's time, but everybody is hearing that same message and following everything with that same fidelity, because you want to keep this cohesive together, right? You want to be, even though you're in providers and Head Starts in various locations, you're still one preschool together, right? You want to work as that one. So it helps to build that and set that tone early on as far as that. In addition, think about, because PD can become very expensive, and getting everybody into locations. So you want to consider what PD content you should have delivered in person versus maybe what could be done through a live webinar and a trainer right there virtually, and what can be self-paced. For me, the curriculum was that non-negotiable in person, right? I didn't care that we had to fly them down, right? Ebony and I were on that same account there because we wanted that curriculum to be delivered and have those hands-on true experiences. And then there were some other trainings that we maybe did virtual through a webinar, or just Eckers is that self-paced that they can do throughout the year and have the support of the teacher coach as well as they're doing it. But importantly, enough to make sure you have 10 days built in right after you get the award before students arrive. You need that 10 days because the curriculum itself could be, depending on which one you go, but most of them are about a 5-day training, right? A 5 full day training. And then you want to leave yourself half days training for the other components, right? Your observation tools, your assessments, and then the other half of the day, we sent our teachers back to their rooms so they can continue the setup, right, and getting their rooms together. So we also did have a floating virtual board meeting scheduled for our approval because, we know we had the anticipated date on a before, right? And things happen. So we had that floating date because time was of an essence, right? You have that really short turnaround. So we kind of just had a stand-in time each day of the week with our board members that if we got the award today, tomorrow we would meet at this time. And if we didn't get it the next day, we would meet at this time. And that was just a special board meeting to approve all things preschool. So it was our staffing, right? Our programming, everything that needed that final board approval. And what was nice is, and I'm going to share, we kind of had our whole staff there because we were on edge the whole time. Our teachers, everybody, Evney had arranged that we had a virtual board meeting so they can all see and hear that final approval because that was still such a reward there as well. And then we, as the question came up before about the calendar, it's imperative that your providers are following your district calendar. And you want to really make sure there are designated, those district PD days aligned to your PD days. And this, you want to make sure it's outlined in their contracts, right? So it's set in stone, because as you're delivering PD in multiple locations or one location, however you're starting, but as you grow, right, you're going to be in multiple locations at some point. You need to have those common times to plan because just getting coverage in, we know some coverage is not the easy thing to do. And I am going to pass it over to the next slide.
Sorry, my clicker jumped over all the slides, so I just have to
Transition to kindergarten. So
Yeah.
we'll be introducing Miriam Carbo-Jackson and Jennifer Catalano.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Miriam Cugbo Jackson from Redwood Elementary School via West Orange Public Schools. And my counterpart is Jennifer Catalano. And so we're going to be talking about, or maybe me, because I know she loves to talk with me, transition to kindergarten. So as a kindergarten teacher, it is so important just to think about our preschoolers as they're coming in, for them to be ready for kindergarten and our expectations. So just having those vertical articulation meetings with preschool. Obviously, we don't have a preschool in place. We didn't have a preschool in place at the time at West Orange, but as having previous experiences and understanding our dynamics, coming together as a kindergarten team, just thinking about those benchmark assessments that we do have to administer, letter identification, number identification, one-to-one correspondence, name recognition, and for pre-Ks coming into a kindergarten program, that they have those fundamental or foundational skills already somewhat in place. And also just with alignment to our current curriculum and our expectations of what we would desire for a preschooler transitioning into kindergarten, and for the preschool team to have those prerequisite skills so that way they're implementing them along with the curriculum that was already set in place. And thinking about the social and emotional aspects of having 3-year-old preschool and 4-year-old preschooler coming into kindergarten is so imperative. The language expectations already sort of them building those acquisitions already prior to coming in, and us as kindergarten teachers supporting that and expanding upon it. Them understanding our routines and procedures that we already would have in place in kindergarten so they can start to perform some of those tasks in preschool is important. I think also as we continue this process, just thinking about when the spring comes along and they're ready to transition to kindergarten, and we're excited to welcome our new students. What does it look like now as they've gone through whether the 3 and 4-year-old program? And so we're hoping that they'll get their 2 years, that we get a report to say, these are things that have happened. These are things that we've met. And so we understand what our baseline and expectation is moving forward. And then if there is, we have the child study team here, a need, if it's applicable, that the PERS plan is in place and is coming in, and so that we can be able to support those students with their needs. I know in kindergarten, building the family communication, the support, knowing that we're not only here as their teachers, but we're becoming part of their family, having those kindergarten orientation so they get to meet us in person, having family nights so we get to start to build the bond that we're going to have with them, not only through the K years, but all the way until they're fifth and beyond, because as a teacher, you just love to see them come back and see you. And then setting up a time for them to come and visit the schools from a 4-year-old transitioning to kindergarten so they can see what our classroom is going to be like, so they can meet their potential teachers during that time. And then just continually thinking about the transition of communicating with the families, having a guidance counselor in your building, communicating with the families and making a plan for whatever needs there may be. And then just building that bond, really. So, I mean, I know as a teacher, I'm excited for every district to have preschool in their schools. And that's my piece.
Thank you. We're going to take questions and answers for this section. This was all things curriculum, instructional materials, professional development. Just to clarify, we did 10 days. It's not a requirement to do 10 days. It's just how long it took us. High Scope really took the 5 days, and we added those other days for all of the other areas assessment. So one of the questions was around that time. That's how much we really needed. So we're just communicating that. When we had that board approval, the day we found out that we were receiving the award notification, our staff hire date was the very next day. All right, it wasn't the day that we started, because now we needed to plan for professional development, receipt of materials and furniture, setting up the classrooms, welcoming our families, the open house, right? So all of those things needed to take place. So as soon as we found out we were awarded, Beatrice mentioned that floating board approval date, the very next day our staff was hired. So therefore, yes, it fit into their contract because we were able to use that time for professional development. It is, I don't know that it's a requirement for 3- and 4-year-olds to be combined, Kim, but we did that.
Okay, so first, I just want to go back to the question about how did they get 10 days of PD and get them to come in earlier than the other teachers? Please remember the start date for West Orange was October
September
3rd-ish.
20th. September.
Well, you decided to start early. But for most of the districts, you had to begin operating in the beginning of October. So your K through 12 teachers were already in place. So these teachers were not coming in prior to your K-12 teachers. They were they were coming in 10 days prior to the beginning of the preschool operating.
Correct.
So I just wanted to clarify that. The question about is 3- and 4-year-olds combined required? No, it is an acceptable way to deliver preschool, but you can have 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds separate, or you can do a mixed age grouping.
Good. Yeah. So yes, we started at the end of September. So we were already in session for our general education teachers. Our regular school year was already in session for 3 weeks.
Right. So just to add to that, just to clarify, so we were in session, so the teachers were reporting, they just weren't rostered their students. So, right, they had to report every day. So that's how we were able to tie all that in.
Right. Our furniture vendor was Lakeshore, Beatrice.
Yes, I placed that in the chat.
Just a plug for them. They were great. Literally, as soon as we got awarded, they were there within the 3 days. They set up everything. They removed all of the things that we didn't need, the garbage, everything, and they just set it up. They were fantastic.
They were amazing. Even when the one item that was on back order were chairs, and I didn't even want to tell Evany we were missing all the chairs for the preschoolers. What that was going to be the reason not to open on time, but Lakeshore went and got me chairs from different places as loaners, and they made it happen. So they were really wonderful to work with.
Yes. Did we hire teachers pending approval? We interviewed teachers pending approval. We were not able to offer a contract. This is another critical member of your interdepartmental communication, your personnel director. He'll speak to us in a minute about all things staffing, and your attorney, right? So the attorney definitely was on speed dial here. What are we allowed to say to staff and what are we not? But Dr. Vespignani will talk to that when we get to staffing.
And one thing that I did do during the interviews was full transparency, right? I explained to the teachers as we were interviewing them that obviously this was all pending, but I asked them to be transparent at the same time that if they're just giving that verbal commitment and if they found something else, to please let me know as soon as possible so I know to continue to move on looking. And that did help a lot, because if somebody did move on, I knew to continue interviewing and working through that spot. So just having full transparency as you're interviewing is the best bet. Letting them know we just don't have all those answers, and that's okay.
Yeah, there's a question about the option to use your own universal screener. Could we use Brigance as opposed to ESIR?
So I'm going to turn to Kim just to clarify if I'm wrong. I remember Brigance was originally on as one of the uses. I don't know if that was moved out. I know there were some options, but I think there was a revision somewhere.
So districts can choose a developmentally appropriate screening tool. There is not one specific in regulations. However, we do ask you to look at what the tool is measuring. Brigance often is used by child study teams as a child study team evaluation tool as opposed to an assessment for gen ed. So if you are funded, or even if you want to have more conversations, you can reach out to our staff. We have liaisons by county who can have conversations about that with you in more detail.
Okay, with regard to the October start date, yes, that is permitted. We did put that we were starting in late September. We understood at the time that that was, again, more points on the application. So we did start our third week in September to get those points, but also to get our students in as early as possible. Again, hence why the planning was so necessary. We didn't have the extra time. There's a question here, Kim. If you already have a district preschool, how would you delay the start? If we are pending the application approval, do you delay everyone?
So basically, many districts who apply either have a tuition based or it is a special ed program and they're doing tuition. So they begin their program in September as is and they convert. Other districts who have no preschool, they just begin operating after they get funding on the first day. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but it's really the district. If you have a PSD program, you're not going to delay operating it. It really looks at the full day. So we have districts that had half day programs, and they converted in October to full day. So it varies.
Excellent. And I think the question was answered. Yes, you could have separate classes for 3 and 4-year-olds. In the application, though, the language does suggest combining as a best practice, but it is permitted to have the separate. And yes, it's 180 days. I think in the first year, based on your response just now, Kim, it's when you open, when we get the funding, when you're awarded, and then when you submit in your application that you're planning to open, and then after that, then you would have your full years, your full year days. We did not supplement our program in addition to the selected curriculum. We identified high scope as our curriculum, and that's what we did use.
I'm going to interject. So if you are funded, you are using a comprehensive curriculum that has been deemed aligned to the state standards. If you feel there is a need for an enhanced curriculum, there is actually a process to request approval from the state to use enhanced curriculums, because we really want to have you be looking at, are you implementing to fidelity, and have you talked to your curriculum developer to identify gaps, because best practice is the comprehensive curriculum and not pulling different pieces into the day.
So those are the answers for that section. We're going to move on to staffing, budget, board approvals, leasing and contracts, and special education. So Dr. Vespignani is going to talk to us about staffing.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez, and good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Joseph Vespignani, Executive Director of Personnel here in West Orange. Super excited to be joining you just to share some of the steps that we took in regard to staffing for our pre-K expansion, and also to share perhaps some of the missteps to avoid and navigate, which, there were some challenges along the way that we're happy to speak to you about today. Absolutely, you'll want to engage your HR department from the onset if you have one. For smaller districts who may not have a true director of HR or personnel, whomever has oversight of that area within your district, you'll definitely want to involve early on, because there are many steps to take in regard to job descriptions, forming committees, all of which I'll share with you throughout this presentation today. So from really the first step, primarily you want to determine the positions within your budget. This, of course, would be connected to your anticipated enrollment in year one, and then potentially for expansion moving on throughout the years. Also in regard to facilities, how many classrooms. So all of those things come into play when you're determining the positions, and the actual positions that we established here in West Orange, I'll share with you on the next slide. From there, you'll want to develop job descriptions. We took a comprehensive look at what other districts were doing. Many of these positions were new positions for us. So they required a new job description. In some cases, it was a refresh of a job description that was existing. But certainly you want to form a bit of a committee to have multiple lens on the job description to ensure that it's clean, that the certifications are what they should be, that the reporting lines are what they need to be. And then ultimately, you'll need to make a recommendation to the board to approve those job descriptions prior to taking any further action. After the board had approved those job descriptions, we then posted for the positions for 10 days externally. And within that time, we started to determine who would have access to the applicant pool to conduct the screening. Also then the formation of questions for an initial screening round, who would serve on the panel round, the questions that we would include in that panel round, and performance tasks as well, which we require of any West Orange applicant as part of our internal process. So all of these steps are really important to take from the onset, so that the candidates and the applicants have a smooth interview process, even if they are not the ultimate candidate who's recommended. We of course want applicants walking away feeling good about the experience. So you want to make sure that the process and the protocol is really what it needs to be. Just in regard to some of the challenges that we faced, so from a hiring perspective and budgetary perspective, staying within the parameters within the potential state aid that would be awarded. As we know, not unique to West Orange or to New Jersey, but nationwide, we are experiencing a bit of a staffing shortage. So it's very much an employee-driven market. So what we're finding in nearly every final phase of an interview process is that candidates are negotiating for a higher salary, and again, part of the challenge is staying within the budgeted salary parameters that you will have. Some other challenges that we faced, once we agreed to terms with a candidate, again, the consistent messaging that we had was, and that we used in every written communication and every verbal communication, that it was contingent upon award notification. We could not provide a contract at that time. Certainly we could provide something in writing, a bit of a letter of intent. But again, it was very much connected, and we were transparent that it's contingent upon award notification. Due to the timing over the summer months, when most folks at that point are set to begin in September, and again experiencing the staffing shortage, really tapping into existing pool, doing some outreach to build the applicant pool was necessary. So availability of not only applicants, but also then the finalists who we had determined we would make a recommendation to the board to employ, their comfort level as they were actively seeking job opportunities was such that if we couldn't provide a contract, when would they provide their notice to their current employer for those who were employed. So all those factors came into play, and we were again very much transparent that we could not offer employment, whereas we were intent to make a recommendation to the board. It was really connected to the state aid being awarded and then the actual board approval. And then we were able to move forward with the recommendations and the contracts, which would then trigger those finalists and those candidates to provide their either 30 or 60-day notice to their current employer. Another piece here that was challenging was in terms of onboarding. So an example of that would be the criminal history background check, fingerprinting. For those who would archive their fingerprints, that can take up to 2 weeks. So with our need for a start date and training and professional development prior to the arrival of our youngest learners, we needed to really focus on allowing for sufficient time for those new staff members to be onboarded, not only in terms of the compliance end of HR, but also from the the support and induction process as well. Just some considerations that we included in our job postings. We have a large and growing Hispanic population here in West Orange, so we did include in many cases bilingual staff being preferred, and we included that in our advertising and within our job descriptions. And again, just consistent messaging in regard to this being contingent upon award notification. And our plan B was just in regard to surveying our current staff, those who may be interested, reviewing certifications of our existing staff, in other words, who may hold a pre-K3 cert but may not be working on that certification at this time, conducting interest surveys. So all these factors came into play. So the positions that we included in our initial budget, we had 4 preschool teachers and 4 preschool teacher assistants. The teacher assistants did require a new job description, whereas we have paraprofessionals for special education. This was a new job description. We also had a teacher coach. We were seeking a school nurse. In the beginning, we had considered this to be a part-time position. It was then quickly elevated due to need to a full-time position. One thing you may wish to determine in a job description, if you're going to provide one in regard to a school nurse or do a refresh, as you may be experiencing, there is a significant shortage of school certificated nurses. So the acceptance of an RN, an individual who holds that license, could be accepted with some parameters outlined in code. We took a long look at the leadership role within the expansion, and would that be a supervisor or a principal? Ultimately, we determined that it would be a supervisor, and that also comes with appropriate certifications as needed, and also determining where these positions would fit into the existing collective bargaining units. So in other words, our supervisor would be a member of our administrators association, and this position would be a new position recognized within that CBA. We also had a CPIS, a community parent involvement specialist / social worker, an administrative assistant, similar to the nurse. This was initially determined to be a part-time position, but increased to full-time. And then since our pre-K students may not necessarily have designated preps, music, phys ed, so on and so forth, with our specialist teachers, there was a need to partner with our sub-vendor. We use EduStaff to solicit their support in having multiple floating substitutes attend the pre-K sites each day to allow for the preps for the classroom teachers. So this was not just limited to in the case when a staff member would be absent on a given day, in which case we would need a sub. But in addition to that, we needed a floating substitute solely for the purpose of providing contractual preps to our teachers. Just some other considerations in terms of actual hires. We then also added a PERS position, a preschool intervention and referral specialist. That job description we had done initially, and then we went through a bit of a revision on that as well. Custodial staff increases to the local budget. And again, just in regard to budgetary perspective, the addition of a floating substitute for absences in addition to the preps.
Ebony, you gotta unmute yourself. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you. Just to a point to the floating substitute for the preps, the curriculum already has embedded music, art, and movement. So it's not really necessary if you're able to accomplish the preps with the floating subs to hire teachers for those areas and increase your staffing, right? Because it's already integrated into your curriculum. And so then you will be able to accomplish those standards that way. With regard to special education, all of the sections, again, have to be full day. Initially, our preschool disabilities, our inclusion classes were half day. We had to convert those. The department is looking for inclusion, and so then they're giving the range of 2 to 3 students max of special education inclusion students in your preschool classes. So when you're planning to integrate special education, they're really not looking for us to have 7 or 8 special education students in a classroom, right? But to keep it within that 2 to 3. For us, the timing of the IEPs in year 1 was huge. The IEPs for us were already written. So we weren't going to move students from one location to another after we found out that we were awarded. So we left our special education students in place for year 1, and then in year 2, we will better be able to take a look at who's sitting in each of those classrooms. A very big consideration, however, as you're thinking about special ed is Head Start. So Head Start does have a requirement for inclusion if you're partnering with them, but they also have an income requirement. And so then it's not just I'm going to place certain students in the Head Start program, they also have to meet the income requirement. So you just have to be aware of that as you're thinking about integrating your special education students. Budget. Budget is huge. We have included a lot of links here. I think if we think about our third biggest area, lessons learned looking back, number 1, somebody mentioned, is this a grant? This is aid. This was incredibly important for our school community because a grant would give the idea that you get it for 1 year and you're not going to get it for the next. This becomes a part of your state aid package. So if you are awarded, then you continue to receive the aid. It doesn't go away after 1 year. That's important for your public because some of your public may think that their taxes are going to increase or that they're going to have to fold it into the local budget later and they're going to see that additional expense. So that's not so. However, a nuance here is that the preschool expansion aid is only for general education students. So when you're thinking about your special education integration, that is going to be in your local budget. Special education teachers, your special education programming, all of that gets paid out of your local budget. There is a link here for special education guidance that the NJDOE has provided. So we've linked it, this presentation, they're going to post it. And so then you'll be able to see that. Again, in your budget, the salaries do account for the majority, followed by leasing costs in our situation. We had to lease space. So that did take a lot of our budget. The per pupil expenditure may change. It may increase by the time you're applying. For us, just to give you an idea, for district classes, it was $14,252. For providers, it was $16,019. And for Head Start, because they also receive federal funding, it was $8,851. And so then your budget is the number of students that you have times your per pupil expenditure. It's not that there's this fixed budget that you get, West Orange, you only get, $20,000 and that's it. It's what is your preschool universe? How many students are you going to serve in year 1? If they're in district classes, this is how much you will get for district classes. If they're in provider classes, this is how much you will get for provider classes. And if they're in Head Start, this is the per pupil expenditure for them. You submit that as a part of your application, and then based on your approval, the state will let you know what you were approved for. Again, we did use ESSER funds to offset some of our initial costs, but there's also guidance around using Title I funds. We've linked that here for you as well, so that you can consider that. One of the biggest challenges was that there is no initial setup funds, right? And so then you're building your budget as is with no initial setup. I think they are working on that, but right now that's where it is. Another challenge was that it's the salaries plus benefits, and the benefits when we created our budget was hovering around 48%. So when we think that we're bringing in a teacher at step 4 for $54,000, then we need to add another 48% to that budget planning for those benefits. Transportation, again, was a challenge to our budget. A consideration would be, again, coordination is critical with your business office. Just being upfront about what those impacts to the local budget are going to be, and can your budget sustain it. Developing those account lines for where everything is going to be charged to, because once you're approved, you're moving quickly within those 3 to 4 weeks to get up and running, to charge for your furniture, for your instructional materials, for your leasing, for your contracts, etc. Important for us in hindsight, there's a line on the budget that says furniture, but technically, when you think about furniture, if it's less than $2,000, it goes into the instructional supplies line. So we had to end up transferring that, and there's a process for transferring. So unless each furniture item is over $2,000, then put it in your instructional supplies line. And also our floating sub, we absolutely needed that for the preps, and we needed it for our absences. Now, critical to that, if you already have subs in your district, they can go on your salary line. But Dr. Vespignani mentioned that we didn't have subs, so we had to contract with a third party, Edu Services, and so then they no longer go in your salary line, they go in your outsourced services line. All right, so that's really important, because if not, then again, you'll be in that place of having to transfer funds. Special education in your budget, we already said that that goes into your local budget. But when you're drawing up contracts with your providers, you're going to have to draw up a contract for your general education students and a separate contract for your special education students, because the funding lines are different. A consideration for your budget is how much or will you charge your providers for shared expenses. So you're going to potentially be sharing a teacher coach. You're going to, maybe the district is providing the professional development for everybody. You may be sharing a social worker. So if there are positions that you're PERS, right? If you're sharing positions, if you're providing the professional development as the district, are you going to charge them anything? Or are you going to give them their complete per pupil expenditure? Have that conversation up front with your providers and your Head Starts. Let them know from the beginning, because if not, then they're going to build out their budget thinking that they have the total amount for their per pupil expenditure, and you may say, but we're charging you for the shared expenses. You can differentiate that. So for example, we knew that Head Start would get a less per pupil expenditure, so we may have said to them, you know, we're going to charge you $100 per classroom, for example, where other providers that might have looked differently if they were private providers. Here are some areas for your budget. Again, that phones, the technology, the internet access, the copiers and the printers. We didn't think about those things. We were thinking preschool and teachers and teacher aides and instructional materials, but those do count in the budget, and they take up a pretty good expense. Custodians, your cleaning, your supplies for your nurse's office, your office supplies. We reached out to our PTA and we got donations for our faculty lounge, for a lot of our open house materials, so that might be a consideration. Any transfers that you have to make after you submit your budget do require county approval, so that's just something that you should know. And our business department suggests that you consult with your auditors for guidance specifically around your budget. The auditors sat with our business department and really helped them out. When you're thinking about your budget, we use the prior year's template because the SOA is not going to be released until maybe around July, and we couldn't wait until July, so we used all of the prior year's template. We've linked for you here the workbook instructions, the templates for your district budget, for your provider budgets, for your Head Start budget, because they're all different. And during your monthly provider meetings, if that's what you decide to have, they're going to ask you for a template, and they're going to ask you for instructions or guidance on how to fill it out. So you might want to just have these at hand and just let them know, listen, when the updated workbooks are released, we'll share them, but here's something that you can use now to start to wrap yourself around your budget costs. We've linked a video presentation from the NEAR Foundation. Karen Garver will be a useful resource for you in helping you with the budget. The NEAR Foundation is free. Beth Gardner and Karen Garver, they will help you along the whole process. They really helped us. But here's a video for how to build your budget and how to complete that template. And also we included the preschool aid guidance for transfers and carryover after you're approved for how to really transfer. So again, our suggestion is to go ahead and get started with these templates, even though they're the prior year. They don't change that much, and then just transfer your information to the new one. On the application page, we'll also share the application link for last year's, for this year's application, so that you'll have that. Board approvals, Dr. Vespignani.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez. So pretty straightforward here, just some items that would require board approval that you would want to be aware of. So the actual submission of the preschool expansion application, the curriculum adoption, the approval of instructional materials or supplies, leases, contracts, preschool expansion plan, and then as I had indicated earlier, any recommendations to the board for employment. Some considerations, establishing a board goal was very helpful in our situation because this was a board goal and the board was very supportive of this initiative. Having consistent communication with the board and the school community, identifying shared language, again, hashtag pending award notification. And then just one, item for consideration is to keep the board approvals for preschool expansion plan general. So in other words, in year 1, 3 private providers, 1 Head Start until award notification.
Yeah, and this was really important because that might change. You might have providers that are ready to come on board for year 1, and then for some reason they may not be able to, so you can switch it up without having to go back and change your board agenda. So that was really important. With leases, contracts, and letters of commitment, we've linked for you the sample provider cover memos and contract templates for your private providers, for your Head Start contract, and then the state FAQ for you. So we had to lease with for a building, right, that we were having our district classes in. We had our contracts for our private providers, 2 separate, one for general ed and one for special ed, because it's coming out of 2 different funding sources, right? And then the Head Start contract is totally different because they have different requirements that they're under. So considerations when you're thinking about these leases and these contracts is building in those costs and the budget right into the contract, using those templates, making sure you plan time for your attorneys to review them. That takes time. So by the time we sent it to the attorneys and they sent it back and we went through that whole process, that takes time. If applicable, include the repairs in the completion timeline, because the providers may have to do some construction or some light, work in their buildings. Just make sure you include it so that by when they will complete that and that it aligns with your open date. One of our providers was not able to come on year 1 because they were not able to get the chip for the elevator, right? That was on shortage, so they had to back out. So, make sure that you're going through each of those items into your, weaving them into your contract. Include your waiver language in your contract, realistic timelines for that construction, being aware of any delays, permits, etc. specify the payment dates in your contract. You'll see that. Your enrollment verification, your process for how you're verifying the enrollment so that you can make those payments. And then we had board approval for letters of commitment. So for each of our providers that were committing to come on board year one, the board approved a letter of commitment from those providers. That was important for us. So we'll stop here for questions and answers for these areas. I'm scrolling back up into the chat box. Dr. Vespignani, with the current teacher shortage and the pre-K3 certification being relatively new, what support can be provided to help teachers obtain certification? Do teachers at provider sites need to have certification day one? Yes. And so is there any support?
Well, I would say that there is a need for them to be appropriately certificated to be in the classroom. So certainly we could provide anyone who was interested in attaining certification as part of the process, but to actually make a recommendation in accordance with the job descriptions that I had indicated earlier, the requirement would be to be appropriately certificated. So that could look like either coming to us with either the experience and already working on a standard. However, an individual may have a certificate of eligibility advanced standing, in which case the district, much like any other position, would place them on that individual on the provisional certificate for 2 years to start, and then provide the state required mentoring as well.
Thank you. Was an EL program offered? We did not. The children were coming in at 3 and 4-year-old. We felt that we would be able to really integrate the academic language of English through the preschool program. We did hire bilingual staff in order to accommodate sheltered instruction and things like that, but we did not offer ELL in preschool. Inclusion versus integrated. For us, that means the same thing. Kim, do you think that means something differently?
So I would think it is the same. We unfortunately don't have any colleagues from the Office of Special Education, but we can reach out to them and see if there is a difference in their terminology.
Excellent. Kim also put in the chat that each county has its own per pupil allocation. We gave ours just as a reference, a point of reference, but you will have yours based on your county and the current year, right? So startup costs will vary by district based on the positions that you put, the number of students and the enrollment. However, there's no set amount, we understand, right? It's the per pupil cost multiplied by the number of students you plan to enroll in year one. And yes, we incurred unplanned costs from our original budget. Some of the things that we incurred is we converted some of our part-time positions to full-time, like the nurse. We didn't account for custodians. That was something that we had to account for. We didn't think about our printers and our copy machines, our nurse office supplies. So those were the things that we just didn't think about. And we've shared here that you really have to go through each office and consider what you're going to build into your budget, and maybe thinking about alternative funding, because there are no to date, there are no startup costs included in the preschool expansion. So we did use ESSER 3 and Title I funding, and we linked the guidance from the state for the Title I in the presentation. There's a question.
I'll take the two that are there, the ECPA LEs and the timeline. So we have not finalized a timeline for the 23-24 school year as of yet. Historically, districts are notified basically when the budget is adopted in July. We do a mandatory TA. The applications are due mid-August. You get notified early September and start in October. Is there a possibility that timeline may change? Yes, but we don't have confirmation yet. As far as the ECPA LEs, those districts are being funded for targeted preschool. This would be transitioning to the universal model. And again, we have not finalized the application process for those districts.
Great. To Michael, when we leased space, what type of building was it? We leased space in a current private provider. So that provider has 10 classrooms. We leased 4 classrooms from them that are our district classrooms, and then the provider reserved the other classrooms to come in to the partnership as a provider. So 1 building, but 2 intentions for the different spaces. We did look, you mentioned looking at a church in your community that has space. It is an existing preschool. As long as you have all of the requirements met for the facility, the 950 square feet, 750 square feet of instructional space, bathroom line of sight, the storage space, not on the 3rd floor, not in the basement, not a trailer, then, and there are other, compliances, but that's just basically if they fit the facilities, you have your person walk through with you, make sure that they fit your district requirements as well, then, you decide on the space. We did visit some spaces where we had to say, unfortunately, this space doesn't meet the requirement, if it was in a basement, for example, or if it just wasn't what, up to code. Some providers thought that because they had certification and their facilities were approved under that certification or under prior regulations, that would meet the requirements for this. And you really have to go through the requirements of the preschool expansion application for this year and make sure that you're meeting those needs now, not in a prior grandfathered scenario. Preschools, we found out that they didn't have nurses on site. We have to have a nurse on site, so we put a nurse on site for our district classes, and then that nurse is available. That nurse travels and is available to the students for the other locations. And I think that answers the questions that I see currently in the chat.
Yeah, Ebony, I'm just going to expand slightly on the ELL program. So HighScope does have an ELL component. I would recommend during that time of the training that you emphasize with the trainers to go in depth in that section to support your preschool teachers. In addition, preschool teachers in our district, and we recommend if you have other sheltered instruction trainings or any trainings revolving around language acquisition, that preschool and the not the master teacher, the teacher coach be included on that to continue to support the ELLs. That was our plan here. So the teacher coach is really going to continue to support in terms of language acquisition based on the training she's received.
Thank you. Thank you. That was important. We're coming up, I did it again, to the last section of the presentation. Sue, if you want to talk about the preschool committee and the application development.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Mendez. I'm Sue Miller, and I am the person on the committee who is a provider in another district and also a community member and parent in West Orange. The preschool expansion journey really began with the grassroots advocacy and efforts of the West Orange Council of PTAs and a few parents who were really interested in bringing preschool expansion to West Orange. In the early days, Advocates for Children of New Jersey, or ACNJ, was very instrumental. They really helped to provide with the information and around advocacy and networking and connecting our district with other districts who'd already implemented the program. The preschool committee, it was really essential to build a strong, dedicated committee that was really essential to the process. The committee members changed throughout the process of the work of preparing for the application.
Where's it going?
You can put it.
Starting first, key participants were in the early stages, PTA and other parents. Then district personnel were involved, and for each district that's going to look a little different, right? You're going to look at who's important within your district to have on the committee. Specialists, kindergarten teachers. If you have a preschool program already, maybe you want preschool teachers part of that committee, principals, and the like. And I would say if you don't already have a preschool person in district, having somebody on the committee with preschool knowledge is really, really essential, because they will help, and preferably somebody who's a provider, maybe in another district, because they are really able to then speak to the providers that you're potentially partnering with, can answer a lot of detailed questions that the district might not have answers to. And then I was able to bring a lot of that state-funded preschool knowledge to the work of the committee. So if you can have access to somebody like that on your committee, I think that would be really helpful. We really see that there were 3 phases of the work of the committee, sort of early, middle, and end. As I mentioned, the early stages were a little bit more community and PTA driven, but then once we got that momentum going, we partnered, brought it to the district, and really it opened up. The middle section was sort of the biggest work of the committee. That's when we started to move towards meeting every month. We talked about the general program categories, looked at the application from the prior year, really started to problem solve at a higher level, and really just think through the different preschool program components. We asked tough questions, grappled with how to overcome obstacles, and really work through the details of what the preschool program might look like. And then the end phase is really the application writing, which we'll talk about in the next slide in just a moment. But I'd say that some of the challenges were really, being able to have the time for district employees to come away from their regular daily responsibilities to have these meetings and to do the work. Here's where it was really important that we had, the superintendents, buy-in and interest in the program, and that really helped to create that forward momentum to be able to free up staff to be part of the committee. And then I would also say communication was very, very essential. So communication within the team itself, within the committee, and we had agendas that were shared ahead of time. We worked collaboratively on live documents to really, think through the different components, ask questions, and really, sort of grapple with the details. And I want to say before we move away from this slide is to really be thoughtful about that communication, both within the community and back out to, or sorry, both within the committee and then back out to the general community. Because in West Orange, it really started from a lot of parent involvement. Parents were very excited to hear how the committee was progressing, how everything was moving in the district, and they wanted, regular updates. So I think we mentioned earlier in earlier slides, having information on the district website, sending out emails. There was some flashes put up on social media to just sort of let parents know what was happening within the district. And I think that was really essential to helping to build that community, help the providers really understand what was happening, and really keep the momentum moving forward. Then we moved into the application development, and that was really the end stage when things really picked up. So really here, I feel like this step was kind of straightforward, especially if you've been working through that committee earlier, kind of getting the process together. So I hinted at in the previous slide, you're going to really need to have key district personnel involved in the application itself. So you might think more clearly about registration, transportation, health and nursing, your ESL components, if that's a consideration for you. Now, everybody that I mentioned might not be actively writing, but they should be definitely part of the collaborative process, because as questions come up in the application, you're going to need to work through exactly how to answer them. And then that also keeps them prepared for when you do get the, hopefully you do get the expansion dollars, then they're prepared and they already know some of what they're going to need to put into place rather quickly. Our meetings were virtual, and then we moved to in-person writing sessions, really utilizing the prior year's application as our guide. We assigned sections to committee members based on their background and knowledge. We collaborated using a live shared documents, leaving comments for each other, questions, sort of collaborating on the development of the different pieces. And I think it's really here in these detailed answering of the questions that the preschool program comes into focus. So you may answer one question and that brings more focus to a previous question that you thought you already had figured out. So it's really, very key process to pulling your entire application together. And some challenges were the learning curve for sure. Blending that preschool knowledge into the district knowledge, especially if you don't already have a preschool program of any kind within your district. So just understanding and learning the different parameters, as we've discussed already, is really essential. And we can't say this enough as well, that there's definitely support systems that are out there. The DOE and Kim Friedel and the NEAR Foundation were really essential, but we recommend that you get into this process early, because once the application comes out, these individuals' time is very short. So you want to be looking at the questions now, really starting to grapple with how it would look in your district and getting your questions and your support in as early as you can. That way you have time to get feedback.
Great, thank you, Sue. And also, once you've submitted your application, they're not going to be able to readily answer questions, because now you're kind of in a competing application process. So you want to make sure that also you're asking ahead of time for those reasons. And so then here we're about to close. This was our timeline for opening after we were awarded the first week of September. By the 2nd and 3rd, we only had 2 weeks to open. So that included all of our board approvals, informing our parents, receiving our furniture and instructional supplies, having our open house, getting our transportation together, securing our meals, our professional development, our staffing, and preparing our spaces so that by the 4th week of September, we were saying welcome to preschool. We did that with an open house. There was a dual purpose there. It was for students and parents to see the facilities, the classrooms, to meet the teachers, to learn about the curriculum, the procedures, but it was also for the community, for our board, for new providers who were contemplating if they were coming on board in future years, and our town council, so that they could see what we were doing. And again, our whole community embrace our goal and help us. We did have a ribbon cutting ceremony. We had so many supplies donated where we had food for our parents. We didn't think about our banner logo and blowing up those balloons until everybody was arriving, right? So it was just those nice, warm, and inviting things, because at the end of the day, it's preschool, right? And so then we needed to shift from this speed application development to now welcoming the babies into our schools. We had to build in time for the teachers to set up the hallways and the classrooms. That was critical. We had to develop a preschool parent manual so that everybody understood all of the details of the school. An overview of the preschool day, what to expect in the classroom instructionally, what classroom supplies, from 2 sets of sheets, right, for your cot, to the change of clothes, all of those things. We had our ESI 3 screener parent questionnaire handed out right there at the open house. We went over our procedures for drop-off, sign-in, pick-up, parking, the nurse's office. The leaving students for the first time was huge, right? And we did have multilingual staff support. And here we confirmed and finalized our registration as well. So this was a multi opportunity for an open house, but to get that paperwork in. And that concludes our presentation. We will open it up to final questions and answers, but we hope that just sharing some of our learning experiences was helpful for you as you're contemplating applying, and what you may want to think about planning for before you actually get awarded. So I'm peering into the chat. How is line of sight defined from one of those potential classrooms? I can see the edge of the bathroom door less than 15 feet away. Would that suffice, Kim?
Yes, if you can see the door of the bathroom from the door of the classroom to the bathroom, it is line of sight. If the door is around the corner, upstairs, it is not line of sight. We would still expect that you would have a staff member going to the bathroom with the child, but it does need to be in line of sight.
Are there any other questions? That's it.
So I'm going to just say thank you so much to West Orange School District. We so appreciate your time and your effort, and I saw someone did say this was very helpful. We will share the link to the meeting in the future. We do need to go through and make sure that the captioning is correct and make any edits. And we will share the PowerPoint. Mr. Mendez, you had said that was okay to do as well. In the link, I did link a couple of things during the meeting, and they linked it in their presentation. The application that was used for 22-23 is on our section of the website currently. I encourage you, if you are thinking about applying for preschool for this coming school year or even the following, that you start looking at that application, like hang up this phone, get your lunch and start looking, because it is an intense process. And the sooner you begin, the better you're going to be positioning yourself. We are happy to talk to you. Every county has a liaison. They have been on the call. We are really happy to answer questions. As Carrie had said, we want you to be successful in your application. But once the process opens, we are no longer able to communicate with you as it is competitive. However, NEAR, the National Institute of Early Education at Research at Rutgers, and ACNJ have a grant, and they have staff that are available to help you through the process. They can help with the application, they can read the application, they give you feedback. So we do have partners in place to support you. So with that, we will promptly end at noon. We do thank you everyone for joining and wish you all a successful preschool application. Thank you.
Bye-bye.